are millions of immigrants endangering America the Beautiful.
Live from Washington, Crossfire. On the left, Bill Press. On the right, Pat Buchanan. In the Crossfire, Dan Stein, Executive Director of the Federation of American Immigration Reform, and Cecilia Munoz, Vice President of the National Council of La Raza.
Good evening and welcome to Crossfire. America's immigration wars are heating up, and the newest front is the environmental movement. The Sierra Club is polling its 500,000 members on whether to endorse a moratorium on immigration to preserve America the Beautiful. Some say population pressures on water, land, and national parks are growing, that 1 million new immigrants a year is the reason. Opponents say the Sierra Club is progressive and must maintain its backing for high immigration. The Sierra Club dispute is bitter, angry, and filled with accusations of outsider interference in an environmental debate. But the issues are clear. Have 30 million immigrants, legal and illegal, who have come to America in the last 30 years put unbearable pressure on the environment? Can America accommodate tens of millions more? Is an America of 400 million people harder on the environment than an America of 260 million? And if so, is the price worth it? Tonight, immigration. Who should come in and how much is enough? Bill?
Dan, welcome to Crossfire. Back 100 years ago, I was the executive director of an environmental organization in California called the Planning and Conservation League. And the one thing that I learned is you stick to your area of expertise and you pick your battles because you can't get them in them all. I mean, you look around today, you've got ARP that fights for Social Security and retirement issues. AFL-CIO fights for union issues. You've got your two organizations, FAIR and La Raza, both are active in immigration issues. And the Sierra Club's the leader out there protecting the environment. What business does the Sierra Club have sticking its nose into your business, your expertise? It has no expertise on it, and it's got no control over immigration.
Well, we have to look back over 100 years. John Muir, who founded the Sierra Club, thought that the pristine and wild mountains of the Sierra were a tremendous national resource. Many Sierrans who've been working on population issues for 20, 25 years have long considered immigration an important component, and no question, this is a tough moral question. It has to be handled delicately, responsibly. But the Sierra Club proposal is responsible. It is reasonable. It says, look, we can't fuel massive population increase through immigration, 150 million, 250 million more people. We're using less oil now per capita, but because of population increases in this country, mostly through immigration, we're using the same amount of oil. So every major environmental and ecological objective facing the nation in the future is compounded or made more difficult by the immigration-related population growth we have introduced through our Congress unwittingly.
Well, first of all, John Muir was also an immigrant. I'm not sure John Muir today would be saying keep other immigrants out. But look, I want to come back to the environmental movement. Part of the problem is from the beginning, the environmental movement, and I used to fight this, has been rightfully criticized as being lily-white and rich, catering to people who spend most of their vacations above the 10,000-foot level in the Sierras. And there are those of us who've been fighting for a long time to tell the environmental movement, you got to build bridges, you got to reach out to the minority community. The message of this, isn't it, is we're here, we got the good life, we don't want any more people coming in. We don't like people of color. Isn't that what you want the Sierra Club to say?
It's a reasonable question, but the reality is there's no evidence that Hispanic or Asian Americans would be less inclined to support the Sierra Club if the Sierra Club supported the immigration controls. Look, the Sierra Club hasn't had a strong immigration position now for 15 years. That doesn't mean minorities have been pouring into the Sierra Club, but the bottom line and the reality is, for most Americans who are concerned about core environmental issues, and Sierra Club members know this, and they're the ones who are behind this initiative, not FAIR, not La Raza. Sierra Club members are behind this initiative. They believe that the club's objective are not consistent with uncontrolled immigration, and that's a decision for them to make.
People are pollution.
No, I didn't say that either. No, people pollute, obviously by definition, but the reality is those countries, Mexico, those other countries with rapid population growth, we have to help them bloom where they're planted, where they are. We can't solve their population problems by letting them all come here.
Cecilia Munoz, right?
Yes.
Okay, I think they mispronounced it at the beginning of the show. The announcer, not Mr. Press. Let me just look. It seems to be that there really is an open and shut case. will 100 million more Americans degrade the environment to some degree? There isn't any doubt about it. The question really is it worth it, isn't it?
The environmental problem in this country has much more to do with consumption than it does with population. If we're not prepared to talk about how big our houses are, how big our cars are, how much we consume in this country, if we're not prepared to deal with those questions, then we really don't have a right to say to Americans, you can't bring in your family members, and to refugees, you can't come here to save your life.
But let's get down to reality. My belief is Mexican Americans and all other Americans, I would like to see them all have their own home, a nice house. But there's no doubt, if you have 100 million more in, and they all have their own home in a nice house, there's no doubt that 100 million more people are going to add to the environmental problems, the use of parks and lands and air and all the rest of it, aren't they?
But what the people that we're talking about are primarily the family members of U.S. citizens. We're not talking about immigrants who are unconnected to the United States. We're talking about your ability and my ability to bring my spouse, to bring my parents, to bring my children from other countries. It is the position that the Sierra Club is talking about really means not allowing families to reunite because we're worried about the environment. That's a strange set of priorities.
But you know, look, maybe it's a strange set of priorities, but we got to agree on a basic fact. In America of 250 million people, and America of 400 million people, the America of 400 million people is obviously going to consume a lot more resources. It's going to use the parks a lot more. It's going to be a lot more problems in building roads and taking up land for highways and schools and all the rest of it. I mean, that's a simple statement of fact. The question, it seems to me, is should we do it or not, isn't it?
I think the question is what's going to have the best impact on the environment. If we're not prepared to deal with consumption in the United States, where we consume the vast majority of the world's resources, then I don't think we have a right to tell people you can't bring in your family.
Wait a minute, Cecilia, you mean to tell me that if we're going to have more people in, I got to cut back on what I'm consuming?
I do mean to tell you, before you tell me I can't bring my husband, you might want to think about the big
But you can bring your husband. The question is whether you can bring the aunt and uncle and grandfather, grandmother, brother, sister.
Spouse, child, parent, sibling. Those are the only people the immigration law allows us to reunite.
Sibling means brother, and he brings spouse, children, parent, sibling.
To their credit, the Sierra Club's leadership opposes this initiative across the board. They are very concerned about what's going on.
What do the members think?
Well, we'll find out. We'll find out, Pat. We're going to have a ballot. But Dan, I want to get back to this point too. That Cecilia's talking about in terms of consumption, and back to where we left off. If I think of the environmental culprits today in this country, you know, they're the oil companies who still want to go up to Alaska and rip open the Alaskan wilderness. You know, they're the mining companies, they're the lumber companies, they're the chicken farmers that are pouring that crap into the rivers here, literally around here.
All legitimate environmental issues.
Those are the enemies. They're not the people who are living here or the people who are coming here.
But remember, all those issues independently of immigration and population growth are legitimate and need to be dealt with and should be dealt with by interested organizations. But immigration plays a very important part in one of the most important factors that makes those challenges politically difficult to achieve. If you're trying to get Americans out of their utility vehicles, if you're trying to get Americans to be more responsible, consume less, consume more responsibly, how does bringing in 100 million more people who want to live, as Pat said, the American dream, who want 2 cars, a house in the suburbs, who aspire to the American lifestyle, how is that made politically more easy?
The fact is, as Cecilia pointed out, I want to get you back in here too, if you look about what Americans consume in terms of the size of their houses, in terms of the amount of land that their house has to be on, in terms of the number of cars that they... No, it's not either. A number of cars that they have to have, in terms of urban sprawl spreading out like this.
What American...
Let me finish. We, in fact, gobble up much more land, much more space than any other people on Earth. What gives us a God-given right to do that?
We are a nation. We have to exercise our democratic right to make the best decisions for our children and grandchildren. What decision is made easier by mass immigration? More prime farmland getting paved over? We're going to have less traffic through immigration, better public schools? No major domestic policy decision is made easier by today's immigration policy.
We are a nation, but we're a nation of immigrants. None of us would be sitting around this table without that policy. John, if the Sierra Club motion had passed back a long time ago, John Muir wouldn't have been here to be one of the founders of this movement. If we deny this heritage that's so important to this nation, we're really undercutting something fundamental to the United States.
Hold it. Cecilia, between 1924 and 1965, we had virtually zero immigration under the New Deal of Franklin Roosevelt, under the New Frontier of John Kennedy, under Harry Truman. How was this country damaged because we took a period to assimilate all who had come in, and made them, introduced them basically to our language, culture, history, traditions, and made this a great, pleasant country. All we're asking for is a time out.
How has this country been enriched by the immigrants who've come in a century ago and a decade ago? Extraordinarily enriched. I've heard the mayor of Philadelphia saying, if we had the immigrants in Philly that were coming into New York, we'd be a much
Let me talk about 90,000 of those immigrants. Let me talk about 90,000. Are you familiar with what happened at the Los Angeles Coliseum? The American soccer team played the Mexican soccer team. 91,000 people. A sports writer for the LA Times said 90,000 of them were Mexican, for the Mexican team. They hooted, booed, and whistled when the national anthem was played. They threw beer and garbage on the American flag. They assaulted the American team with garbage and cursed them out when they were leaving. You are familiar with what happened out there at that Coliseum. I want you to explain what is going on if these folks have come here and truly love this country, that they would behave that way toward their own country's team.
Let me paint you another Coliseum scene. There are now naturalization ceremonies going on in big stadiums across the country of thousands and millions of people who waited in long lines to get here, waited in long lines to become U.S. citizens, who weep when they take the oath of citizenship, who are eager new Americans.
Did you condemn what happened in the Coliseum?
We did. This is the
Can I get the statement where you condemned it?
I can certainly get that for you. This is.
Tell me why that happened.
Immigrants who come here legally, come here, they choose to become Americans, and they reinvigorate America.
Why did that happen in the Coliseum?
Well,
I can't tell you because I wasn't there.
Let me ask you this, Dan. Would you join Pat in saying that that event in the Coliseum should be a black mark on all immigrants in this country, as he's suggesting?
No, obviously not. But it's also fallacy to say that because Albert Einstein was an immigrant, that therefore all immigrants are Albert Einstein. The bottom line is we tend to often make these generalized character generalizations about how immigrants are all wonderful, and many of them are and do fine, but we ignore the fact that uncontrolled or poorly regulated immigration also brings a lot of unwanted factors, and it is the immigration policy. The immigration policy of the nation that needs to be debated and understood by the American people, not about individual immigrants.
We are debating it, and we'll continue to debate it and pick up on that question. Are immigrants who come to this country a big plus or a drain on our economy?
Crossfire is brought to you by Norfolk Southern, the thoroughbred of transportation.
Welcome back to Crossfire. Sierra Club members are marking their ballots on the big issue we're debating tonight, what to do about immigration. Open the borders or shut them down? What's best for America? Two guests tonight, two experts on immigration policy. Dan Stein, he's Executive Director of the Federation of American Immigration Reform, or FAIR, and Cecilia Munoz, she's Vice President of the National Council of La Raza. Pat?
First, a factual question, Cecilia. How exactly does La Raza translate? What does it mean?
The National Council of La Raza takes the term from a poem by someone named Jose Vasconcelos. It's a term that means the cosmic race. It means a race of people.
What does La Raza mean?
La Raza, the word literally means race, and it refers to Hispanics in the United States.
This means the race.
It refers to a group of people that's really a mix of races and religions and cultures. The Latino community is a very diverse community.
Now let me ask this, which concerned me slightly, more than a little slightly, is the President of Mexico came to the United States and urged Mexican Americans to vote Mexico's interests in the United States. I thought it was offensive. Now Mexico has decided to give something called dual citizenship, I guess.
Dual nationality.
Dual nationality. In other words, you can be an American citizen and a citizen of Mexico.
That's true of most countries in the world.
Well, that's sort of like having being in love with two women, isn't it?
No, it's not. No, it's not at all. Most countries in the world provide that. Britain provides it, and I don't see anyone objecting to that, for example.
Well, let me read you a statement by an American president, Woodrow Wilson. He said, some Americans need hyphens in their names because only part of them has come over. Is that not true of some Hispanic Americans.
I don't believe it to be true of Irish Americans or Hispanic Americans. This is an American community, and when the rest of the country wakes up to that and realizes that this country will be a much better place, please don't question our loyalty to this country.
Dan,
we'll get back to the...
Dan, let me ask you, I was curious as to how and why the Sierra Club got involved in this whole issue. And I did a little research today, and I think the Sierra Club might have been led into this issue by people like you. In 1986, you were quoted,
shocked.
1986, in a memo, you said, quote, "The Sierra Club may not want to touch the immigration issue, but the immigration issue is going to touch the Sierra Club." In fact, through an organized campaign and mailings and money from you and your supporter, the Pioneer Fund, you've gone out and actually influenced members of the Sierra Club to put this on the ballot, haven't you?
Well, I'm happy to say that not a single word you uttered is true. I mean, not a single word.
You don't get any money from the Pioneer Fund?
No, and not a single money of foundation money from the Pioneer Fund or any other foundation through FAIR went into this initiative. And I didn't make that statement. John Tanton, our founding chairman, made that statement. And, of course, he was involved in founding the Sierra Club chapter years and years ago in Michigan, and he's been a lifelong environmentalist, won the Chevron Environmental Award 3 years ago. The bottom line is, look at the people who support it. Edward O. Wilson, Lester Brown, Paul Ehrlich, Gaylord Nelson. I mean, people whose ironclad environmental credentials have been behind an important initiative like this for years.
How about
And it is the Sierra Club that is being basically the leadership of the Sierra Club is the one that is missing the obvious connection between immigration, population, and environmental
How about
protection.
Alan Whedon, who's a member of your board of directors, correct? Who says that he and his brother have given most of the money for a mass mailing that went to the Sierra Club members, number one, to sign the petition, and number two, now to vote for this. Whedon Foundation also getting money from the Pioneer Fund.
No, that's not true either. That's not true. And I wish Alan Whedon had given us some money for this initiative, but they didn't. And I wish at least some of the things you were saying were true, but none of it's true. So what I'm at a loss.
In fact, you're saying then that all the articles in the San Francisco Examiner, the San Francisco Chronicle, and all the other papers are wrong, that you and your
because they never said that.
Anti-immigration have been out there lobbying for this initiative.
I would not be denying a word you said because I'm defensive about what you're saying. I would be proud of most of it, but the bottom, I'm sorry, but it just isn't true. Look, this ballot initiative got going because Alan Cooper and several important Sierra Club members said, look, we need the club to do something. It is their initiative, it is not our initiative, and it is unfair to say that it is.
Cecilia, look, here's what I want to get at. Look, with immigrants in the United States used to be more patriotic than Americans right here.
They
were
are.
flag-waving, cheering. Now,
They still are.
there's two things. I mentioned what happened, which astonished sports writers in Los Angeles, to that American team out there. Let's leave that aside. We now find that in colleges and universities, Hispanics are having their own graduation in dorms. Whites have theirs. Asian Americans have theirs. Black Americans have theirs. We seem to be breaking down from all being a melting pot of Americans into ethnic groups and almost virtual ethnic conflict. And this is what really concerns Americans, if folks have come here not to be Americans.
You know, this is part of an age-old trend in this country. Americans have always been concerned about the newcomers coming in, that they weren't going to become American enough, that they weren't going to adapt to the language and to the values. What we forgot 200 years ago, what Ben Franklin forgot 200 years ago about the Germans that he was so worried about, what we forgot about your ancestors who came in, who were criticized and who were attacked for being who they are, is that people come here on purpose, and they come here because they want to be part of this country, and they want to be part of the dream, and that's what makes us strong.
That's wonderful. You know, it's wonderful and true, but that's why everybody was shocked by what happened in that stadium.
Including immigrants themselves.
Proper stadium alone.
90,000 people.
What event, Pat?
90,000 people.
200 years of immigrants coming to this country.
We have not had, on a sustained basis, we have not had 200 years or 400 years of immigrants coming at the rate we have. Look, properly controlled immigration, responding to the national need, properly controlled under reasonable numbers. 200,000.
Wide open today.
200,000.
Not wide open today.
But, Bill, if you get immigration properly down to traditional levels of 200,000 or less, 200,000 immigrants a year, that's about a fraction of what we bring in today, would be consistent with our historic traditions and our obligations. We do not need the rate we bring in today.
There are people in this country who wait 4 years to reunite with their spouses. That's not in the interest of the American people or in the interest of our values.
Dan Stein, thank you very much. Cecilia Munoz, thank you very much. Ms. Sierra Press, thank you very much. Pat Buchanan and Bill Press will be back with closing comments on the Sierra Club and immigration. Bill, you know, the U.S. E pluribus unum says, out of many different peoples, we become one people.
I know the Latin.
You know the Latin, good for you. You remember something for that. But the problem I see in this country is you see it, the Bosnianization of America breaking down into ethnic groups and racial groups, and conflict is growing. And I think it's a harbinger when 90,000 folks get up and curse and spit on and laugh at and mock a U.S. team in an American stadium, and those folks are the beneficiaries of all America has to offer. Well, and it's not 10 guys or a gang. It's 90,000 people, and the sports writers for the Washington Post and L.A. Times were as stunned as I was.
Pat, one snowflake doesn't make a snowstorm. I've been out to this RFK Stadium with great events where you had a lot of, Latinos there, these big soccer matches. I was at the World Cup out at the Rose Bowl. They were wonderful events. They were spirited events. They were all united events. They were all Americans cheering on their teams, Pat. I want to read you a want ad from the New York Evening Post, 1830. Wanted. A cook or a chambermaid must be American, Scotch, Swiss, or African, no Irish. You know, Pat, that's our history. There have always been people who are afraid of one group of immigrants or another, and they all end up coming into this country, making this country better and stronger. They did yesterday, and they'll do it today, Pat.
Okay, how many is enough?
From the left, I'm Bill Press. Good night for Crossfire.
From the right, Pat Buchanan. Join us tomorrow night for another edition of Crossfire.